The Galactic Preservation Society's greatest achievement in bureaucratic short-sightedness was Station Omega-7, a gleaming research facility orbiting Keth Prime, a planet whose main export was creative ways to die. The station's transparent aluminum windows offered researchers premium seats to daily acid storms and lightning that considered personal space a suggestion. Dr. Threnix addressed his newest research assistants with the confidence of someone whose closest encounter with his subjects involved viewing them through reinforced barriers. Apex predator rehabilitation represents the pinnacle of xenopsychological intervention, he announced, gesturing toward containment areas that housed what the society optimistically called rehabilitation candidates. The reality was a success rate hovering between embarrassing and occasionally tragic. Most specimens either succumbed to academic boredom or were currently sedated into something resembling cooperation. Our facility operates on a strict hierarchy, Dr. Threnix continued. Trained xenobiologists conduct research, certified handlers manage feeding protocols, and maintenance staff handle mundane, functional aspects. Speaking of maintenance staff, Cassie Brennan was 3 levels down, battling a ventilation unit that had declared war on airflow. She'd survived 8 months on Station Omega-7, approximately 7 months longer than people with functioning survival instincts. Cassie, being human, had apparently missed that particular evolutionary memo. The air recycling system in Block 7 had malfunctioned for weeks, and researchers were complaining about atmospheric irregularities affecting their equipment. Never mind that the irregularities probably prevented half the station's predators from dying of heat exhaustion. Typical, she muttered, wrestling with a stubborn bolt. Spend fortunes on containment technology, but can't install working ventilation, her communicator chimed. Commander Brixel's voice crackled through static. Maintenance, to Block 7, Alpha. We have a situation. Cassie closed her eyes and counted to 3. In her experience, situations on a xenobiology station generally involved cleaning up something that used to be alive, or occasionally cleaning up something that was very much alive but shouldn't be where it currently was. Define situation, Commander. The Shadowmoor exhibit. Environmental controls are malfunctioning. Dr. Threnix wants it fixed immediately. Of course he did. The Shadowmoor was Dr. Threnix's pet project, his claim to fame, the creature that was going to revolutionize predator rehabilitation. It was also the creature that had hospitalized 3 handlers, traumatized a xenopsychology team, and somehow managed to short-circuit its containment field twice. On my way, Cassie sighed, gathering her tools. She'd heard about the Shadowmoor from other maintenance staff, the ones who'd transferred to safer jobs, like defusing antimatter bombs. According to official reports, it was a magnificent specimen of apex predation from Keth Prime's deepest trenches. According to unofficial reports, it was a 15-foot nightmare with more teeth than a horror novelist's fever dream. Block 7 Alpha was eerily quiet as Cassie approached. The usual environmental hum was replaced by irregular wheezing that suggested the atmospheric processes were having a mechanical breakdown. Her scanner showed oxygen levels dropping, carbon dioxide rising, and temperature spiking to nearly 30 degrees Celsius. Well, she told herself, at least it's not boring. The Shadowmoor's containment area was a masterpiece of technological overkill. Force fields, reinforced transparent aluminium, atmospheric isolation systems, and enough sensors to monitor a small moon. All of it was currently flashing various shades of red and yellow, which in the universal language of warning lights meant something has gone catastrophically wrong. Cassie found the primary environmental console and began running diagnostics. The system was a mess of cascading failures, each one triggering 3 more problems. Someone had apparently tried to optimize the atmospheric mix without understanding the basic principles of keeping things alive. The result was an environment that was simultaneously too hot, too humid, and slowly filling with toxic gases. Idiots, she muttered, pulling up the containment field specifications. You'd think xenobiologists would understand that living things need to actually breathe. A soft sound from the containment area made her look up. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see movement in the shadows, something large and fluid, like liquid darkness given form. The shadow maw was awake, and from the way it was moving, it wasn't particularly happy about its current accommodations. Cassie had seen plenty of predators during her time on the station, but the shadow maw was different. It didn't pace or rage or throw itself against the barriers like most frustrated creatures. Instead, it seemed to be watching, evaluating. Its movements were too purposeful, too calculated for a simple animal. She turned back to the console and began the complex process of manually overriding the environmental systems. It would take time. Time the creature probably didn't have if the atmospheric poisoning continued. The smart thing would be to evacuate the block and let the automated systems handle it. The safe thing would be to call for backup and wait for the specialists. Instead, Cassie did something that would have horrified every safety protocol on the station. She opened a direct communication channel to the containment area. "Hey there, big guy," she said, not really expecting a response. "I know things are pretty uncomfortable right now, but I'm working on it. Just try to stay calm, okay?" The movement in the shadows stopped. For a moment, Cassie wondered if the creature had collapsed from the toxic atmosphere. Then two eyes, impossibly large, impossibly intelligent, appeared in the darkness, focused directly on her. "Okay," Cassie said, her voice considerably less steady than before. That's new." The creature moved closer to the transparent aluminium, and Cassie got her first clear look at the station's most dangerous resident. The shadow maw was beautiful in the way that avalanches were beautiful, terrible, magnificent, and absolutely deadly. Its form seemed to shift and flow, part organic predator, part living shadow, but it was the eyes that caught her attention. They held an intelligence that was definitely not in any of the research files. "You're not just a predator, are you?" Cassie asked softly. The creature tilted its head, a gesture so startlingly human that Cassie nearly dropped her tools. Then it did something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the station's specimens. It spoke, not in words, not in any language she recognized, but in a series of harmonics that somehow bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her mind. The meaning was clear: distress, discomfort, and underneath it all, a plea for help. "Right," Cassie said, her hands already moving over the console with renewed urgency. "Let's get you some decent air." The next hour was a delicate dance of technical troubleshooting and improvised engineering. The environmental system had been so thoroughly sabotaged by well-meaning incompetence that Cassie had to essentially rebuild it from scratch. Through it all, the shadow maw watched her work, occasionally making those soft, harmonic sounds that somehow conveyed encouragement or concern. When the atmospheric readings finally stabilized, Cassie allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The air was clean, the temperature was comfortable, and the creature was no longer in immediate danger of suffocation. "There," she said, wiping her hands on her coveralls, "that should be better." The shadow maw approached the transparent aluminium barrier and pressed what might have been a hand against the surface. The gesture was unmistakably one of gratitude. "Don't mention it," Cassie said. "Just, maybe don't tell anyone I was talking to you. I'm pretty sure there's a regulation against that." The creature's response was a sound that could only be described as laughter. Dr. Threnix arrived 20 minutes later, flanked by his usual entourage of assistants and looking thoroughly displeased. "Report," he demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Environmental system failure," Cassie explained. "Someone had been tinkering with the atmospheric processes without understanding the basic chemistry involved. I've stabilized the system, but it'll need a complete overhaul to prevent future failures." Dr. Threnix frowned. "The system was functioning perfectly yesterday. Our latest behavioral modification protocols require precise atmospheric control." "Your behavioral modification protocols nearly killed your specimen," Cassie pointed out. "The atmospheric mix was toxic." "Impossible. We've been following established xenopsychological principles." He was interrupted by a sound from the containment area. The shadow maw had emerged from the shadows and was regarding the assembled researchers with what could only be described as disdain. His posture was different now, more alert, more purposeful. It looked like a creature that had just made a decision. "Fascinating," Dr. Threnix breathed. It's responding to our presence. Perhaps the atmospheric adjustment has made it more receptive to behavioral conditioning. Cassie bit back her first 3 responses, all of which would have been considered unprofessional. I don't think it's responding to you, Doctor. Nonsense. Clearly, our research protocols are beginning to show results. We should implement the next phase of conditioning immediately. The Shadow Moor's response to this suggestion was a sound that definitely wasn't laughter. It was more like the audio equivalent of rolling one's eyes, if rolling one's eyes could somehow convey existential contempt for the entire concept of behavioral conditioning. Over the following weeks, Cassie found herself returning to Block 7 Alpha more frequently than strictly necessary. The environmental systems had a tendency to develop minor issues that required her attention, and the Shadow Moor seemed to appreciate the company. She began to understand that the creature wasn't just intelligent, it was brilliant. It communicated in harmonics and gestures, shared jokes that shouldn't have been funny across species barriers, and demonstrated a grasp of station operations that put most of the research staff to shame. More importantly, it was desperately lonely. "They don't understand, do they?" Cassie asked during one of her unofficial visits. "They think you're just another predator to be studied." The creature's response was a complex harmony that somehow conveyed resignation, frustration, and a deep, abiding sadness. It had been captured from its homeworld, separated from its kind, and subjected to months of tests and observations by beings who couldn't recognize intelligence when it was staring them in the face. "I'm sorry," Cassie said. "I wish I could do more." The Shadow Moor moved closer to the barrier and made a sound that was unmistakably a question. "No," Cassie said, understanding immediately. "I can't let you out. Even if I wanted to, which I do, it would be detected immediately. The security systems are tied into everything." The creature nodded, a gesture that was becoming increasingly human the more time they spent together. Then it did something that made Cassie's blood run cold. It began to show her the station's security systems, not through words or diagrams, but through pure understanding. The Shadow Moor had been studying the station with the same intensity that the researchers had been studying it. It knew every system, every weakness, every potential point of failure. It had been mapping the station's defenses, not as a prisoner planning escape, but as a strategist evaluating a potential battlefield. "You're not just intelligent," Cassie whispered. "You're military, aren't you? A soldier?" The creature's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed pride, loss, and a warrior's salute. Dr. Threnix, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with his star specimen's lack of progress. The Shadow Moor refused to respond to standard conditioning, showed no interest in behavioral rewards, and had somehow disabled its neural monitoring equipment without triggering alarms. "It's almost as if the creature is actively resisting our protocols," he complained to Commander Brixel. "Perhaps we need to reconsider our approach." "What about the maintenance worker?" Ensign Delt suggested. "She spends considerable time in Block 7 Alpha. Perhaps her presence has some calming effect." Dr. Threnix's expression suggested he found the idea of a maintenance worker succeeding where trained xenobiologists had failed to be somewhere between insulting and absurd. Humans lack the sophisticated understanding necessary for meaningful interaction with apex predators. Any perceived calming effect is likely coincidental. What Dr. Threnix didn't know was that his sophisticated understanding of xenopsychology had led him to classify the Shadow Moor as a solitary apex predator with limited cognitive capacity. The actual reality, that he was dealing with a highly intelligent, possibly telepathic being from a spacefaring civilization, somehow hadn't occurred to him. This oversight was about to become significantly more problematic. The first sign of trouble came during the night shift, when the station's long-range sensors detected an unscheduled ship approaching from the outer system. The vessel was running dark, using minimal power and advanced stealth technology that suggested either military origins or piracy. Given that Station Omega-7 was supposedly conducting legitimate research, the smart money was on piracy. Commander Brixel sounded the alert and the station's minimal defensive systems came online. Station Omega-7 was a research facility, not a military outpost. Its defenses were designed to deter opportunistic raiders, not deal with a serious threat. Cassie was in her quarters when the alert sounded, but she was dressed and moving before the klaxons stopped echoing through the corridors. Her first instinct was to check on the containment areas. Panicked predators and emergency situations were a combination that tended to result in significant property damage and loss of life. She found chaos in the research levels. Several specimens had responded to the alert by attempting to break free from their containment, and the automated systems were struggling to maintain order, but Block 7 Alpha was eerily quiet. The Shadow Maw was waiting for her, its posture alert but calm. When she approached the console, it made a series of harmonics that conveyed urgency and warning. Through their improvised communication system, it managed to convey something that made Cassie's blood run cold. The approaching ship wasn't here for research materials or valuable equipment. It was here for the Shadow Maw. "Hunters," Cassie whispered, understanding flooding through her. "Someone's been tracking you." The creature's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed both confirmation and resignation. It had been expecting this. The capture, the containment, the research station, all of it had been a trap, designed to keep it in one place until its pursuers could arrive. "Not if I can help it," Cassie said, her hands already moving over the console. What happened next would be debated in xenobiology circles for decades. According to the official reports, maintenance worker Cassie Brennan suffered a temporary psychotic break and released the station's most dangerous predator during a security crisis. According to the unofficial reports, she saved everyone's lives. The truth, as usual, was more complicated. The station shuddered as the hostile ship attached itself to the primary docking port. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, isolating sections of the station and trapping researchers and staff throughout the facility. The intruders moved with military precision, their equipment and tactics suggesting a well-funded operation with specific objectives. Dr. Threnix was in the main laboratory when the hunters arrived. They wore fully enclosed combat suits and carried weapons that looked like they'd been designed for hunting very large, very dangerous prey. Their leader was a tall, imposing figure whose voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Dr. Threnix," the hunter said, consulting a handheld device. "We're here for the Shadow Maw. Our employer has offered a substantial sum for its live capture." "It's impossible," Dr. Threnix sputtered. "This is a legitimate research facility. You can't simply—" "We can, and we will," the hunter interrupted. "The creature belongs to our employer. Your research was conducted on stolen property." While Dr. Threnix was discovering that the galaxy's legal protections for research facilities were somewhat less comprehensive than he'd believed, Cassie was having a very different conversation 3 levels down. "I can get you out," she told the Shadow Maw, "but you'll have to trust me." The creature's response was immediate and unequivocal. It trusted her completely. Cassie's plan was either brilliant or insane, depending on one's perspective. The station's security systems were designed to keep threats contained, but they could also be used to control movement throughout the facility. By carefully manipulating the bulkheads and emergency protocols, she could guide the Shadow Maw through the station, while keeping it away from the hunters. The only problem was that doing so required her to be with the creature, guiding it through passages that were barely large enough for a human, let alone a 15-foot apex predator. "This is probably going to be terrifying," she told the Shadow Maw as she prepared to disable the containment field. "For both of us." The creature's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed both amusement and affection. When the containment field dropped, Cassie experienced a moment of primal terror as several million years of evolution screamed warnings about standing next to something that could kill her without effort. The Shadow Maw emerged from its prison-like flowing darkness, its form shifting and adapting as it moved through the cramped space. Then it did something that redefined Cassie's understanding of the term apex predator. It bowed. The gesture was unmistakably one of respect, acknowledgement, and gratitude. This wasn't a wild animal being released. It was a warrior accepting an alliance. "Come on," Cassie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's get you out of here." Moving through the station with the Shadow Maw was like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while blindfolded. The creature was remarkably adaptable, able to compress its form to fit through passages that should have been impassable. But it required constant guidance and coordination. Cassie found herself communicating in a mixture of words, gestures, and increasingly the harmonic language the creature had taught her. They encountered their first group of hunters in Section C, near the main laboratory complex. The armed figures were methodically searching the facility, their equipment scanning for biological signatures. The Shadowmoor's response to their presence was immediate and unambiguous. These were enemies, and they would be dealt with accordingly. What followed was a masterclass in predator tactics. The Shadowmoor didn't attack directly. Instead, it used the station's environment to its advantage. Lights failed, environmental systems malfunctioned, and the hunters found themselves stumbling through a facility that seemed to have turned against them. When they finally encountered the creature, it was on its terms, in terrain it had chosen. The fight was brief and decisive. The hunters' weapons were designed for capturing prey, not for combat against an opponent that understood strategy and tactics. Within minutes, the entire squad was either unconscious or fleeing back to their ship. "Well," Cassie said, surveying the aftermath, "that was educational." The Shadowmoor's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed both satisfaction and mild disappointment. It had been expecting more of a challenge. The remaining hunters proved to be more cautious, but no more effective. The Shadowmoor had spent months studying the station's layout and systems, and now it was using that knowledge to turn the facility into a weapon. Environmental controls failed at strategic moments, security bulkheads trapped hunters in isolated sections, and the creature itself seemed to be everywhere at once. Dr. Threnix, meanwhile, was having a crisis of professional confidence. His carefully controlled environment had become a battlefield, his prize specimen was loose and apparently working with the maintenance staff, and his understanding of xenopsychology was being challenged by events that shouldn't have been possible. "How is this happening?" he demanded as another group of hunters retreated in disarray. "The creature should be operating on pure instinct. It can't possibly understand tactical coordination." "Maybe," Commander Brixel suggested carefully, "our understanding of the creature was incomplete." The suggestion that months of careful research might have been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions was so horrifying to Dr. Threnix that he refused to consider it. Instead, he activated the station's emergency protocols and began flooding the facility with sedative gas. This turned out to be a mistake. The Shadowmoor's response to the gas was immediate and violent. Whatever respect it had developed for the station's crew evaporated in the face of what it perceived as betrayal. For the first time since its capture, the creature became truly dangerous. Cassie found herself in the unique position of trying to calm an enraged apex predator while sedative gas slowly filled the air around them. "Hey," she said, her voice already growing sluggish from the chemicals. "It's okay. They're scared. People do stupid things when they're scared." The creature's response was a harmony that conveyed rage, betrayal, and a desire for immediate, violent revenge. It had trusted these beings, and they had responded with poison. "I know," Cassie said, swaying slightly as the gas took effect. "I know. But killing them won't solve anything. It'll just prove they were right to be afraid." The Shadowmoor paused, its form rippling with barely contained fury. Then it looked at Cassie, really looked at her, and its posture changed. The rage was still there, but it was controlled, directed. It had made a decision. What happened next would be remembered as the moment when humanity's relationship with the galaxy's apex predators fundamentally changed. The creature moved through the station like a force of nature, but instead of destroying everything in its path, it began systematically disabling the hunters' equipment. Weapons were crushed, communication devices were destroyed, and the raiders found themselves trapped in a facility that had become actively hostile to their presence. More importantly, the Shadowmoor began protecting the station's crew. Researchers who had been trapped by the emergency protocols found themselves mysteriously freed. Staff members who had been threatened by the hunters discovered that their attackers had been rendered unconscious by unknown means. The creature that had been classified as a dangerous predator was acting as the station's guardian. The final confrontation came in the main laboratory, where the hunter's leader had cornered Dr. Threnix and was demanding access to the creature's containment area. The Shadow Maw emerged from the shadows like a living nightmare, its form shifting and flowing as it surrounded the armed figures. For a moment the tableau was frozen. The terrified researchers, the outgunned hunters, and the apex predator that held everyone's lives in its claws. Then Cassie stumbled into the room, still groggy from the sedative gas, but determined to prevent a massacre. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone present. "This doesn't have to end in violence." The hunter leader turned his weapon toward her, but the Shadow Maw's response was immediate. The creature flowed between them, its form blocking the weapon's line of fire, its posture making it clear that any threat to Cassie would be met with immediate retaliation. "You see," Cassie said, addressing the room at large, "it's not a mindless predator, it's a person. An individual with thoughts and feelings and the capacity to make choices." Dr. Thrennick stared at the tableau before him, the maintenance worker standing beside the galaxy's most dangerous predator, both of them facing down armed hunters with nothing but determination and mutual trust. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The research clearly indicates—" "The research was wrong," Cassie interrupted. "It was wrong from the beginning because you were asking the wrong questions. You wanted to know how to control it, but you never bothered to ask what it wanted." The Shadow Maw's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed agreement, amusement, and a deep sense of vindication. The hunter leader, faced with a creature that was clearly more intelligent and better prepared than his intelligence had suggested, made the practical decision to withdraw. The operation had been planned as a simple capture mission, not a battle against a coordinated defense. His employers would not be pleased, but they also wouldn't be pleased if he got his entire team killed. As the hunters retreated to their ship, the Shadow Maw turned to face the assembled researchers. Its posture was no longer that of a captive specimen or a raging predator. It was the stance of a being who had proven a point and was now waiting to see what would happen next. "So," Commander Brixel said into the silence, "what do we do now?" The answer came from the creature itself, through its harmonic language, supplemented by gestures and expressions that had become increasingly comprehensible over the months. It made its position clear. It had no intention of returning to captivity, but it was willing to discuss alternatives. What followed was the galaxy's first formal diplomatic negotiation with an apex predator. The process was complicated by the fact that none of the participants had any experience with the protocols involved. The answers turned out to be complex and would take years to fully work out. But the first step was simple: recognition. "We were wrong," Dr. Thrennick said, the words coming out with obvious difficulty. "We classified you as a specimen when you were clearly a person. We thought we were studying you, but you were studying us." The Shadow Maw's response was a harmony that conveyed acknowledgement, qualified forgiveness, and a wry observation about the ironies of the situation. "What do you want?" Commander Brixel asked. The creature's answer was surprisingly simple. It wanted to go home, not to escape or to seek revenge, but to return to its people and share what it had learned about the galaxy's younger races. The negotiation process took weeks. The Shadow Maw proved to be a skilled diplomat, capable of complex reasoning and surprisingly flexible in its approach to problem-solving. More importantly, it demonstrated a capacity for forgiveness that humbled everyone involved. In the end, an agreement was reached. The creature would be returned to its homeworld as an ambassador, a bridge between its people and the galactic community. The research station would be converted into a proper diplomatic facility, and Cassie? She was offered a position as the galaxy's first human apex predator liaison, a job title that she suspected had been invented specifically for her, but which came with responsibilities that were both terrifying and exciting. "Are you sure about this?" she asked the Shadow Maw during one of their final conversations before its departure. "I'm not exactly diplomat material." The creature's response was a harmony that somehow conveyed absolute confidence in her abilities, along with what might have been affection. "I never trained you," she said, understanding finally dawning. "You were training me." The Shadow Maw's response was unmistakably laughter. As the diplomatic transport prepared to carry the creature back to its homeworld, Dr. Thrennick approached Cassie with an expression of profound bewilderment. "I still don't understand," he said. How did you succeed where trained xenobiologists failed? What was your secret? Cassie looked at the departing ship and thought about the months of conversations, the gradual building of trust, the moment when she'd realized that intelligence and wisdom weren't the exclusive province of any single species. I listened, she said finally. I treated it like a person instead of a problem to be solved. Dr. Threnix nodded slowly, as if filing away this information for future reference. And the creature's response to you, the apparent bond that developed? It chose me, Cassie said, watching the ship disappear into the void. I thought I was just fixing the air conditioning, but it was conducting an interview. It was looking for someone who could see past the assumptions and recognize what was really there. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Galactic Preservation Society had spent months trying to train the galaxy's most dangerous predator, never realizing that the predator was training them. It had been evaluating their intelligence, their capacity for growth, their potential as allies or enemies, and in the end, it had chosen a maintenance worker as its master not because she was the most qualified, but because she was the only one who understood that mastery wasn't about control, it was about respect. The galaxy had just received its first lesson in what it meant to be truly civilized. The teacher had been an apex predator, the classroom had been a research station, and the homework was going to involve fundamentally rethinking everything they thought they knew about intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of civilization itself. But then again, the best teachers often came from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most dangerous predators made the wisest diplomats.